sheltered 2 freezing Apache women. 3 days later, 30 Apache surrounded his cabin. Marry one or both. Elias Carter had learned long ago that the mountains did not care about a man's plans. They followed their own rules. Winter came early that year, earlier than anyone expected, and when it arrived, it came with full force. Elias lived alone in a small wooden cabin tucked deep into the hills, far from towns and trading posts. He chose this life because silence suited him. After years of loss and hard work, he found peace in chopping wood, hunting when needed, and watching the seasons change without anyone telling him what to do. That evening, the sky had turned dark long before sunset. Thick clouds rolled in, heavy and low, pressing down on the land. The wind howled through the trees like a warning. Elias had just finished stacking firewood near the door when snow began to fall. At first, it was light, almost gentle, but within an hour it became fierce. Snowflakes slammed against the cabin walls, and the wind grew sharp enough to cut through heavy clothing. Elias secured the shutters and added more wood to the fire. He had enough supplies to last weeks, maybe months. Still, he knew storms like this were dangerous. Out here, one mistake could cost a life. He sat at his small table, eating a simple meal, listening to the wind roar outside. That was when he heard it, a sound that did not belong to the storm. A faint knock. At first, he thought it was his imagination. The wind often played tricks, making branches scrape and bang against the cabin. Elias froze, holding his breath. Then he heard it again. Softer this time, weaker, but clear enough to send a chill through him that had nothing to do with the cold. Someone was outside. Elias stood slowly and reached for his coat. Living near Apache territory meant he always had to be careful. Not everyone welcomed a lone settler so close to their lands, and Elias understood why. He respected their space and avoided trouble, but fear still whispered in his mind. Still, no one would be out in this storm unless they were desperate. He opened the door just a crack. Cold air rushed in like a living thing, stealing the warmth from the cabin in seconds. Snow piled high on the ground, nearly reaching the doorstep. In the dim light, he saw 2 shapes collapse forward. 2 women. They were barely standing, their clothes stiff with ice, their hair dusted white with snow. One clutched the other's arm, trying to keep her upright. Their faces were pale, lips trembling, eyes heavy with exhaustion. Elias immediately recognized them as Apache women, adults, likely sisters from the way they stayed close together. For a brief moment, fear locked his body in place. He knew the stories people told, stories full of anger and violence, but as he looked at them, he did not see danger. He saw people on the edge of death. Without thinking further, Elias pulled the door open wide. "Come in," he said firmly, his voice cutting through the wind. Quickly, they did not argue. They barely had the strength to move. Elias helped them inside, shutting the door hard behind them. The cabin felt warmer instantly, the fire crackling as if welcoming them. One of the women collapsed to her knees, shaking uncontrollably. The other tried to speak, but could only manage broken breaths. Elias guided them closer to the fire and handed them blankets. He kept his movements slow and respectful, careful not to frighten them. He had seen what fear could do to people. It made everything worse. The women wrapped themselves tightly, their eyes fixed on the flames. Elias poured warm water into a pot and placed it near the fire. He knew better than to give them food or drink too fast. Survival in the wilderness taught patience. For several minutes, no one spoke. Only the sound of wind outside and fire inside filled the room. Elias watched them closely, ready to help but not forcing anything. Eventually, the woman who seemed stronger lifted her head. She met his eyes briefly and nodded, a simple gesture but full of meaning. Gratitude. Trust, Elias nodded back. When they were stable enough, he offered them warm broth. They accepted with trembling hands. As they drank, color slowly returned to their faces. The weaker sister leaned against the other, eyes closed, breathing steadier now. Elias stepped back and sat on a stool near the wall, giving them space. His cabin was small, 1 room, simple furniture, no extra comforts, but it was safe. That mattered most. Through gestures and a few shared words, Elias learned that they had been traveling before winter fully arrived. A sudden storm caught them far from their people. They had walked for hours, fighting the wind, following the faint hope of shelter. When they saw the cabin lights, it felt like a miracle. Night stretched on. Elias added more wood to the fire and stayed awake, watching over them. He understood the risk he was taking. Helping them could bring trouble later. Their people might misunderstand his actions. Fear tried to creep into his thoughts, but he pushed it away. Leaving them outside would have been a death sentence. He could not live with that. As the hours passed, the storm grew even stronger. Snow buried the cabin deeper, sealing them in. The women slept near the fire, breathing softly now. Elias finally allowed himself to rest, sitting upright, eyes half closed, alert even in sleep. Morning came without sunlight. The storm still raged, and the door was half buried in snow. Elias dug it free enough to check outside. The world had disappeared under white silence. There would be no travel today. When he returned inside, the women were awake. They shared what little they could of their story through signs and simple words. Elias listened carefully, showing respect. He offered them dry clothes he had stored, old but clean, and turned away while they changed. Over the next hours, they shared meals, warmth, and silence. There was no fear now, only cautious understanding. Elias treated them as guests, not strangers. He never raised his voice or made demands. Every action showed that his help came with no hidden price. As night fell again, Elias realized something important. This was no longer just about surviving a storm. What he had done, what he was doing, could echo far beyond these cabin walls. He did not know what the future held, but he knew one thing for certain. On that freezing night, when the storm tried to claim 2 lives, he chose compassion over fear. And that choice had already begun to change everything. The storm did not let up the next day. Elias woke early, the wind still howling through the trees, the snow piling even higher against the cabin. The fire was low, but it kept the room warm enough for the women to survive. They had slept through the worst of the night, huddled under blankets, but exhaustion still clung to their bodies. Elias quietly moved around the cabin, checking supplies and chopping more firewood. The storm had isolated them completely. There would be no travel for days, perhaps longer. At first, the women sat quietly, not speaking much, their eyes distant. They had survived something terrifying, and their thoughts were heavy. Elias understood this. Trauma did not disappear just because danger had passed. He offered small comforts, warm broth, fresh blankets, and a place near the fire where they could rest safely. They accepted slowly, their trust growing with each simple gesture of kindness. Communication was not easy. They spoke very little English, and Elias knew almost nothing of their language. But words were not always necessary. Simple actions, passing a blanket, offering food, showing respect, built a bridge between them. At one point, Elias brought a few pieces of dry meat and some bread. He broke them into small portions and handed them over. One of the women took it hesitantly, glanced at Elias, then nodded slightly. It was a small sign of acceptance, but for Elias, it meant the world. During the long day, they stayed close to the fire. Elias moved around, attending to chores, chopping more wood, ensuring the fire stayed alive, repairing minor gaps in the cabin that the storm had worsened. He noticed that the women were watching him, curious but careful. They studied his movements, learning, perhaps wondering if this man would remain a friend or become a danger. Elias made it clear through every action that he was no threat. He spoke gently, sometimes pointing to items or miming actions to explain what was safe or helpful. Hours passed. The storm's rage created a world of white outside, cutting off the mountains and forests entirely. The women started to tell small fragments of their story using gestures and a few words they knew in English. They had been traveling to meet relatives when the storm hit unexpectedly. Their tribe lived across the mountains, and separation during winter could be fatal. Elias listened, nodding, showing that he understood and cared. Though they could not fully communicate, Elias felt their gratitude. The younger sister, who seemed frailer, occasionally reached for his hand when she was scared, then withdrew quickly, embarrassed at her dependence. Elias understood. In this place, with the wind trying to steal warmth and life, needing help was not shameful. It was necessary. As the day dragged on, Elias shared stories about life in the mountains. He spoke about the seasons, about hunting and survival, about the quiet peace of a life lived close to nature. The women listened, fascinated. They had never spent time in a place so isolated, yet it held a strange comfort. For the first time since the storm began, small smiles appeared on their faces. The younger sister mimicked some of his words, trying to speak English, and Elias encouraged her gently. Night approached again, darker and colder than the previous night. The wind pounded the cabin walls, shaking them as if testing the strength of the small wooden structure. Elias knew this storm would last, and he prepared for a long night. He moved firewood closer, boiled water for warmth, and ensured blankets were ready. The women, now a little more confident in his care, huddled near the fire, talking quietly to each other in their language, but occasionally glancing at Elias with expressions that spoke more than words could. By the second night, trust had begun to grow stronger. The women no longer flinched when Elias approached. They allowed him to help them with small tasks, placing more wood in the stove, arranging blankets, even helping him fetch water from a nearby frozen stream. Elias noticed their strength slowly returning. Survival was teaching them to rely on their own resilience again, but now with him as a helper rather than a stranger. Despite the growing bond, Elias was cautious. He knew that helping them could have consequences. Their tribe might misunderstand his intentions. Out here, miscommunication could lead to anger or suspicion, yet he never hesitated. Every time he saw their exhaustion or fear, he reminded himself why he had opened the door in the first place. Kindness, he realized, was worth the risk. During quiet moments, the women would look out the small windows at the storm outside. Their expressions were thoughtful, even anxious, but Elias respected their silence. He understood that in unfamiliar territory, with the world buried in snow, it was natural to feel fear and uncertainty. He sat near them sometimes, reading by the fire, sometimes just watching. No words were needed. His presence alone offered reassurance. By the third day, the storm finally began to subside, leaving behind a quiet, frozen landscape. Snow stretched for miles in every direction, hiding paths and covering familiar landmarks. The women were stronger now, their bodies recovering from exposure. Elias could see that their trust had grown. The younger sister even spoke a few words in English, asking simple questions about the cabin and the mountains. Elias answered patiently, teaching her what he could, careful to use gestures and repetition so she would understand. Elias also learned more about the women. They were sisters, traveling together since childhood. They had survived many hardships, and their resilience amazed him. Despite their initial fear, they carried themselves with dignity, even in the face of extreme danger. Their determination to survive and their ability to adapt to such harsh conditions left a deep impression on Elias. When the storm cleared completely, the world outside looked different, peaceful, silent, and untouched by human hands. The women prepared to leave, though neither wanted to speak of it directly. Elias gathered supplies, dried meat, bread, blankets, and handed them over. They accepted with gratitude, their eyes glistening with tears, and for the first time they smiled fully. The bond created over 3 days of shared struggle had become unspoken but strong. Before they left, the older sister held Elias' hand briefly, a gesture of thanks and recognition. The younger sister followed, giving a shy nod. They stepped out into the snow, their footprints marking the path they would follow back to their tribe. Elias watched from the doorway, the cold air biting at his face, feeling a strange mix of relief and sadness. They had survived, but their journey was not yet complete. As the women disappeared into the white landscape, Elias returned to the cabin. The storm was over, but its memory lingered. He realized that the experience had changed him. He had always lived alone, valuing solitude and silence. But helping the women had reminded him of the power of human connection. Compassion, he understood, was not weakness, it was strength. Elias spent the next hours clearing snow from the roof and paths, thinking about the women and what might come next. He did not yet know that this act of kindness would soon bring him face to face with the larger Apache tribe, but he felt ready. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he was determined to continue acting with respect and care. In the quiet of the cabin, with the fire burning brightly and the storm finally gone, Elias allowed himself a moment of reflection. He thought about the choices he had made, the risks he had taken, and the trust that had grown in just 3 days. Helping 2 strangers in a time of great danger had taught him something invaluable. That true courage sometimes meant opening one's door, offering warmth and standing firm in the face of fear. And so, as the night settled over the mountains, Elias Carter sat by his fire, knowing that life in the wilderness had just become far more complicated and far more meaningful than it had ever been before. The next chapter of his life, he sensed, would bring challenges he could never have imagined, but he was ready to meet them with the same courage and compassion that had guided him through the storm. The days after the storm were calm, but Elias Carter felt a tension he could not explain. The mountains were silent, blanketed in fresh snow, and the air was crisp with cold. He carried on with his usual routines, chopping wood, checking traps, and tending the small vegetable garden he had managed to preserve. The women he had sheltered were gone, but their presence lingered in his mind. He remembered the look in their eyes, the gratitude that had shown so clearly despite the fear and exhaustion. Elias wondered what their journey back to their people had been like. The snow was deep, and the mountains were unforgiving. He knew they were strong, but even the strongest needed luck in such conditions. He hoped they had reached safety, and every time he looked at the horizon, he imagined them walking steadily toward home, their figures small against the vast white wilderness. Then one morning, as dawn broke and the first soft light of day illuminated the frozen landscape, Elias heard something unusual. It was not the wind, not the trees creaking under snow. It was the sound of footsteps, many footsteps. They were steady, firm, and moving with purpose. Elias froze, his heart pounding. The steps were too rhythmic, too organized to be random travelers. Something was coming toward the cabin. He quickly moved to the small window, peering through the frost. His breath fogged the glass as he strained to see. At first, he could make out only shadows moving between the trees, and then slowly he realized the truth. They were people, many people. 30 figures, tall and strong, emerged from the snow. Their movements were confident, almost ceremonial. They were armed, but not in a threatening way, at least not yet. Elias' mind raced. Could this be the tribe of the women he had helped? Fear gripped him, but he knew panic would do no good. He retreated slightly from the window, trying to calm himself. The cabin door shook as someone outside tested it. Elias took a deep breath, remembering the storm, remembering the women who had trusted him. Whatever happened now, he would act with respect. The door opened slowly. The first figure to step forward was the older sister. She walked with confidence now, strong and certain. Behind her, the younger sister followed, her eyes bright but careful. The rest of the figures formed a semicircle around the cabin, watching but not advancing. Elias realized that this was a controlled, deliberate visit, not a random attack. The leader, taller than the others and wearing a decorated cloak, stepped closer. His expression was serious but not angry. He spoke to Elias in a language he did not understand. The women quickly translated, using the few English words they knew. Elias listened intently. "They are your people," the older sister explained. "They have come to see you, they want to know why you helped us, they have come to honor your choice." Elias' heart thumped. He had expected suspicion, perhaps anger, maybe even threats. Instead, he saw respect. The leader nodded slightly at the women, then turned to Elias. The translation came in fragments, but the meaning was clear. His actions had been witnessed and understood. The women had told their people how he had sheltered them, fed them, and protected them from the storm without asking for anything in return. The leader's next words surprised Elias even more. Through translation, he learned that the tribe's customs recognized such acts of kindness and bravery. In their culture, when a stranger risked safety and showed respect, it was an honor. They had come not to punish, but to offer a choice, an unusual one. Elias would be asked to join the tribe in a special way, forming a bond that carried great meaning. Elias struggled to understand. 30 warriors surrounded his cabin, but they were calm, watching for his reaction rather than forcing one. The women stood close, their hands brushing against each other, a small sign of solidarity and reassurance. Elias realized that the offer he was about to receive was not just about him. It was about families, respect, and trust across cultures. The leader spoke again, slowly and clearly, with the women translating. Elias listened, his mind racing. The proposal was simple yet profound. He could choose to marry one of the women or both, according to their customs. The offer was a recognition of his courage and honor during the storm. The women had vouched for him, their voices carrying weight in the tribe. Elias stepped back, unsure of what to do. He had never imagined his life could change in this way. The thought of marrying either woman, let alone both, was overwhelming. Yet he could see the sincerity in their eyes. The women, his guests, who had trusted him in their moment of greatest need, and the tribe, honoring him rather than punishing him. He remembered the storm, the fear in the women's eyes, the exhaustion that had nearly claimed them. He remembered how they had depended on him and how he had chosen to help without hesitation. That choice had brought him here, surrounded by people he did not know, yet who offered respect rather than hostility. Elias understood that this was not a test of desire, but a test of character. The women stepped forward slightly, their eyes meeting his. Neither spoke immediately, but their expressions were clear: gratitude, trust, and hope. Elias felt a strange mixture of awe and responsibility. The tribe had offered him a bond not just with the women, but with a community that valued honor, bravery, and kindness. To refuse would be to reject the trust they had placed in him. To accept would be to enter a life far different from the solitude he had always cherished. Elias took a deep breath and asked the women to speak. Through translation, the older sister explained that the tribe respected his freedom. They had offered the choice, but it was entirely his decision. There would be no pressure, no obligation beyond what he felt was right. The younger sister nodded in agreement, her voice soft but confident as she spoke a few words in broken English. Elias spent hours speaking with the women and the tribe, learning about their customs, their expectations, and the meaning behind the offer. He realized that this was not simply about marriage in the way he had understood it before. It was about mutual respect, protection, and the joining of lives in a partnership that carried responsibility and honor. As the day wore on, Elias reflected deeply. He thought about his life in the mountains, the isolation he had chosen, and the quiet peace he had valued. But he also remembered the warmth that had filled the cabin during the storm, the way helping the women had created a bond stronger than fear or distance. He understood that life was offering him something new, something that could not have been planned or predicted. Finally, as the sun began to set and the snow glistened in the fading light, Elias made his choice. He spoke carefully through the translation, explaining that he wished to honor the trust and courage of the women while respecting their wishes and the tribe's customs. The women smiled softly, relief and happiness in their eyes. The leader nodded approvingly, signaling acceptance of Elias' decision. The warriors lowered their weapons, the tension that had filled the air dissolving into calm. Elias felt a mixture of relief, pride, and responsibility. He had faced fear, danger, and uncertainty, and emerged with honor intact. But more than that, he had formed a connection that would shape the rest of his life, one born from compassion, respect, and courage in the midst of a storm. That night, Elias sat by the fire, the tribe having retreated slightly to give space. The women shared stories of their lives, their traditions, and their people, while Elias listened intently, eager to learn. He realized that his life would never be the same. He had gone from a solitary man in the mountains to someone whose choices had created bonds across cultures, bonds built on trust and bravery. As the fire crackled and the mountains lay silent under the night sky, Elias understood a profound truth. Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness, opening a door, offering warmth, showing respect, could echo far beyond one's imagination. What had begun as a single night of sheltering two women had become a moment that would forever shape his destiny. The snow continued to fall lightly outside, but inside the cabin, warmth and understanding filled the room. Elias knew that challenges would come, that life with the tribe and the women would require patience, learning, and care. But he also knew that he was ready, guided by the same principles that had led him to open his door on that stormy night. And so, as the night deepened, Elias Carter sat quietly by the fire, feeling the weight of the choices before him, but also the promise of a life filled with connection, respect, and shared courage, a life far richer than the solitude he had once prized above all else. The next morning, the cabin felt different. The storm had passed completely, leaving the mountains sparkling under a pale winter sun. Elias Carter awoke early, as was his habit, but this day was no ordinary day. The snow lay thick on the ground, undisturbed except for the faint tracks of the women and the tribe from the previous day. He knew that life as he had known it, quiet, solitary, and predictable, was about to change forever. The two women, the sisters he had sheltered, were already awake, preparing a simple breakfast by the fire. The older sister moved with calm precision, while the younger sister hummed softly, a sound that brought a warmth to the cabin that even the fire could not match. Elias watched them, feeling a deep sense of responsibility and respect. Their trust had been placed in him, and he had honored it. Now he needed to honor what was coming next, a choice that would shape his future. Outside, the tribe had returned, though not to threaten. They formed a respectful circle around the cabin, keeping a careful distance. Elias understood their presence. It was a reminder that their customs carried weight, that the decision he would make was not only his own, but also tied to the women and their people. He stepped outside, the snow crunching beneath his boots, and faced the leader, who nodded with quiet authority. Through translation, Elias listened as the leader explained the expectations. The choice offered to him, the possibility of marriage to one or both of the women, was not simply a personal matter. It was a matter of honor, trust, and responsibility. The women had vouched for him, and now the tribe awaited his decision. Elias felt the weight of the moment. He had never faced anything like this in his life. His years of solitude had not prepared him for the gravity of such a choice. He looked at the sisters. The older one, strong and composed, met his gaze steadily. The younger, shy but resilient, glanced down, then up at him with a flicker of hope. Elias saw their courage, their trust, and the lives they had entrusted to him. He thought of the storm, the fear in their eyes, and the nights spent huddled by the fire. He remembered the relief and warmth he had offered, and the bond that had grown from those shared hours. After a long silence, Elias spoke carefully. He expressed gratitude for the offer, explaining that he understood the honor and responsibility involved. He acknowledged the courage of the women and the respect of the tribe. He asked for time to consider the decision fully, not out of hesitation, but out of the understanding that such a choice could not be made lightly. The leader and the women nodded, recognizing the sincerity in his words. Over the next hours, Elias spent time with the sisters, talking quietly by the fire. They shared stories of their childhood, their travels, and their lives before the storm. Elias listened, learning about their culture, their values, and their hopes. He realized that the bond between them had grown not only through survival, but also through shared understanding and respect. Each story, each gesture, strengthened his admiration and care for them both. As the day progressed, Elias reflected on his own life. He thought of the years spent alone in the mountains, the quiet routines he had cherished, and the lessons he had learned from nature and solitude. He realized that those years had prepared him not for isolation, but for patience, resilience, and empathy, the very qualities that this moment required. He understood that accepting the tribe's offer would not mean abandoning his principles. It would mean extending them into a larger, shared life. By late afternoon, the snow began to soften, the sunlight reflecting off the white landscape in gentle patterns. Elias felt clarity forming within him. He had seen courage, trust, and kindness in the sisters' eyes. He had felt the respect and care of the tribe. And he had learned that life, no matter how carefully planned, often brought challenges that could not be ignored. When he finally spoke, Elias addressed the leader first, through the women translating his words. He explained that he would accept the tribe's offer in a way that honored both the sisters' wishes and the customs of their people. He would marry them both, not out of obligation, but out of respect and commitment to the bond that had formed through shared struggle and trust. The words, carefully chosen, carried sincerity and humility. The leader's expression softened. The warriors around the cabin lowered their heads slightly, signaling acceptance and approval. The sisters smiled, relief and happiness shining on their faces. The younger sister's shy glance turned into a full smile, while the older sister's composed demeanor relaxed into quiet joy. Elias felt a mixture of awe, responsibility, and gratitude. He had never imagined that a stormy night could lead to such a profound connection. The ceremony that followed, though simple, was meaningful. In the warmth of the cabin, surrounded by the tribe at a respectful distance, the bonds of trust, honor, and mutual respect were formalized. Elias and the sisters exchanged words, gestures, and commitments that transcended language and culture. Each promise was spoken with sincerity, reflecting the courage and compassion that had brought them together. As evening fell, the fire crackled brightly, casting shadows that danced across the cabin walls. Elias sat between the two sisters, feeling a sense of belonging he had never known in his years of solitude. Outside, the snow lay undisturbed, a silent witness to the events that had unfolded. The mountains, once harsh and isolating, now felt protective, as if they had watched and guided the unfolding of a new chapter in Elias' life. Over the following days, the tribe shared stories, traditions, and guidance with Elias. He learned not only the customs related to marriage and family, but also the deeper values of respect, courage, and community that had guided their lives for generations. He practiced patience, listened carefully, and acted with humility, earning the trust of the tribe in ways that went beyond words. Life in the cabin transformed. No longer was it a place of solitude. It became a home filled with warmth, shared labor, and the quiet strength of mutual respect. The sisters contributed their skills, knowledge of the land, and stories, while Elias continued his work of maintaining the cabin, hunting when necessary, and learning more about the customs and traditions of his new extended family. Elias realized that the storm, which had once seemed like a threat to life itself, had become a catalyst for profound change. It had revealed the strength and courage of the sisters, the power of trust and compassion, and the importance of acting with honor even in the face of fear. The experience had taught him that life's most meaningful connections often arose from moments of crisis, when kindness and bravery were most needed. As winter slowly gave way to spring, the cabin and its inhabitants settled into a rhythm of shared life. Elias learned to navigate the balance between his past solitude and his present responsibilities. The sisters, now partners in life and survival, offered wisdom, companionship, and shared resilience. Together they faced challenges, harsh weather, isolation, and the demands of daily survival, with cooperation, respect, and understanding. The story of that winter became a lesson not only for Elias, but for the tribe as well. It demonstrated that courage and kindness could bridge divides, create trust, and foster lasting connections. The bond that formed in the cabin became a symbol of the power of compassion, showing that a single act of sheltering two people in need could ripple outward to create profound and lasting relationships. Elias often reflected on the night the storm had arrived. He remembered the fear, the uncertainty, and the decision to open his door. He realized that choice had set into motion events that would shape his entire life. The trust of the sisters, the respect of the tribe, and the shared bond that followed had become a foundation for a life far richer than the solitude he had once prized. Years later, Elias would tell the story to others, not as a tale of adventure, but as a lesson in courage, compassion, and the importance of helping those in need. He would speak of the storm, the snow, and the two women who had changed his life forever. And he would remind everyone that even in the harshest conditions, human kindness could create warmth stronger than any fire. The cabin, once a symbol of isolation, had become a home filled with laughter, learning, and mutual care. The mountains, which had tested Elias' courage, now stood as silent witnesses to the bonds he had formed. Every winter, when snow blanketed the land, Elias remembered the storm, the two sisters, and the tribe that had surrounded his home. He remembered the fear and uncertainty, but also the trust, respect, and love that had grown from it. In the end, Elias Carter understood a simple truth: life's greatest challenges often bring its greatest blessings. The storm that had seemed so dangerous, the choice that had felt impossible, and the tribe that had tested him, all these had led to a life of connection, respect, and shared courage. And in that life, Elias found not only love and partnership, but also a sense of purpose and belonging that he had never imagined possible. The fire crackled through the long winter nights, and Elias sat quietly between the sisters, thinking about how a single act of kindness had grown into a life filled with meaning. Outside, the mountains remained cold and silent, but inside the cabin, warmth, laughter, and trust had taken root. And that warmth, born from compassion and bravery, would endure through every season, every storm, and every challenge that life in the mountains would bring. Elias' story, simple yet profound, became a testament to the idea that courage and kindness, even in small moments, can shape destinies. It was a story that would be remembered, retold, and honored, not for the drama, but for the quiet, enduring power of human empathy and respect. And so, in the heart of the snowy mountains, the cabin stood as a symbol of trust, courage, and the extraordinary bonds that can form when people open their doors and their hearts to those in need.